The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval training facility as Petty Officer Sarah Martinez adjusted her tactical vest one final time. At 26, she had earned her place among the elite through sheer determination and countless hours of rigorous preparation. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her focused brown eyes reflected the intensity that had carried her through 2 years of specialized training. Today marked another milestone in her journey toward becoming one of the first women to serve in an active SEAL unit. The obstacle course stretched before her like a concrete and steel maze designed to break both body and spirit. Sarah had conquered it dozens of times before, but today felt different. The weight of expectation hung heavy in the humid morning air, mixed with something else she couldn't quite identify, a tension that made her instincts prickle with unease. Commander Jake Harrison stood at the edge of the training area, his weathered face unreadable as he watched the preparations unfold. At 42, Harrison had spent nearly 2 decades in special operations, his reputation built on fairness, excellence, and an unwavering commitment to his team. The silver eagles on his uniform gleamed in the morning light, symbols of authority earned through countless missions in some of the world's most dangerous places. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing as they surveyed the scene before him. "Martinez, you ready for this?" called out Petty Officer First Class Derek Stone, his voice carrying an edge that Sarah had learned to recognize over the past months. Stone was built like a linebacker, with broad shoulders and thick arms covered in tattoos that told stories of deployments across 3 continents. His crew cut was regulation perfect, but his smirk suggested something far from professional standards. Sarah nodded curtly, checking her gear one final time. She had worked too hard to let Stone's obvious antagonism throw her off balance now. The psychological warfare was just another obstacle to overcome, another test of her mental fortitude. She had faced worse and emerged stronger. Beside Stone stood Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Webb, a lanky Texan whose easy drawl masked a calculating intelligence. Webb had been watching Sarah with increasing resentment over the past weeks, making comments just loud enough for her to hear about women who didn't know their place. His pale blue eyes held a coldness that reminded Sarah of winter storms back home in Colorado. The third member of what Sarah privately called the Resistance was Petty Officer Second Class Tony Ricci, a compact man from Boston whose quick wit usually stayed just on the right side of insubordination. Ricci's dark eyes darted between his companions and Sarah, and she noticed how his usual joking demeanor had shifted to something more serious, more focused. "Listen up," Commander Harrison's voice cut through the morning chatter like a blade. His presence commanded immediate attention from everyone on the training ground. Today's exercise is designed to test tactical coordination under extreme stress. Martinez, you'll be running point on a simulated hostage rescue scenario. Sarah felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. This was the kind of challenge she had been preparing for, complex, dangerous, requiring split-second decision-making and absolute trust in her team. The scenario would test every skill she had developed, from marksmanship to hand-to-hand combat to strategic thinking under pressure. "Stone, Webb, Ricci, you're her backup team," Harrison continued, his gaze moving deliberately between the 3 men. "Your job is to support the mission leader and ensure mission success. Any questions?" The silence that followed felt loaded with unspoken tension. Sarah noticed the glances exchanged between the 3 men, quick and meaningful in a way that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. She had learned to read the subtle communications that passed between teammates, and something about this felt wrong. "No questions, sir," Stone replied, his voice steady but his eyes holding that same calculating look Sarah had noticed earlier. The training facility's mock urban environment sprawled before them, a carefully constructed maze of buildings, alleyways, and obstacles designed to simulate real-world combat situations. Sarah had navigated these streets countless times during her training, memorizing every corner, every potential sniper position, every possible escape route. Today, however, the familiar terrain felt different, charged with an energy that set her nerves on edge. As the team moved into position, Sarah found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her here. Growing up in a military family in Colorado Springs, she had always known she wanted to serve. Her father, a retired Army Ranger, had taught her that strength wasn't just about physical capability, it was about mental resilience, moral courage, and the willingness to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. Her mother, a former military nurse, had shown her that compassion and toughness weren't mutually exclusive. From both parents, Sarah had learned that earning respect meant proving yourself through action, not words. That philosophy had carried her through the grueling selection process and the months of intensive training that followed. The radio crackled to life in her earpiece as the exercise controller outlined the scenario. A high-value target was being held in the central building of the mock city. Her team needed to infiltrate, neutralize the hostiles, and extract the target without casualties. It was a standard scenario, one they had all trained for extensively. Sarah took point, moving with the fluid precision that had become second nature after months of intensive preparation. Her weapon felt comfortable in her hands, an extension of her will and training. Behind her, she could hear the measured footsteps of her team, their breathing controlled and professional through the comm system. The first building was clear, their entry smooth and coordinated. Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction at how well the team was working together despite the underlying tensions. Perhaps she had been reading too much into the morning's strange atmosphere. Perhaps the men had simply needed time to accept her presence and capabilities. As they approached the target building, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. The positioning wasn't quite right. Instead of taking proper overwatch positions, Stone and Webb had moved to angles that would give them clear lines of sight on her position rather than potential threat areas. Ricci had fallen back further than tactical doctrine dictated, creating gaps in their formation that could prove dangerous in a real situation. "Check your positions," she said quietly into her radio, her training overriding the growing unease in her stomach. "We need better coverage on the eastern approach." "Copy that," came Stone's reply, but she noticed that none of them actually adjusted their positions. If anything, they seemed to be tightening their focus on her rather than maintaining proper tactical awareness. Sarah's instincts, honed through years of training and natural intuition, were screaming warnings now. Something was fundamentally wrong with this picture, but she couldn't put her finger on exactly what it was. The men's responses were professional enough, their movements technically correct, but there was an undercurrent she couldn't identify. As they reached the entrance to the target building, Sarah made the decision that would change everything. Instead of proceeding according to the planned entry sequence, she called for a tactical pause, using hand signals to indicate potential threats that didn't actually exist. It was a test, a way to gauge her team's reactions and, hopefully, understand what her instincts were trying to tell her. The response told her everything she needed to know. Instead of adjusting to address the supposed threats, all three men shifted their attention more directly toward her position. Stone's hand moved to his sidearm in a way that had nothing to do with the scenario they were supposed to be executing. Webb's position shifted to cut off her primary exit route. Ricci moved to block her secondary escape path. In that moment of crystalline clarity, Sarah realized that she wasn't part of a training exercise anymore. She had become the target, and the three men she was supposed to trust with her life had turned the scenario into something far more dangerous and personal. Her training kicked in with automatic precision. Years of preparation had taught her to assess threats rapidly and respond accordingly. The mock urban environment that had been her training ground for months suddenly became a potential battleground where the greatest danger came not from simulated enemies, but from the men who were supposed to have her back. Sarah's mind raced through her options with the calculated speed that separated elite operators from ordinary soldiers. She could call for immediate extraction, but that would require admitting that she couldn't handle the situation, a perception that could end her career before it truly began. She could confront the men directly, but, without concrete proof of their intentions, it would be her word against theirs. The third option was the most dangerous but, potentially the most definitive. She could play along with whatever they had planned, document everything she could, and hope that her training and skills would be enough to handle whatever they threw at her. It was a gamble that could cost her everything, but it might also provide the evidence needed to address what was clearly a serious breach of military conduct and values. As these thoughts flashed through her mind in the space of heartbeats, Sarah made her choice. She would see this through to its conclusion, whatever that might be. Her father had taught her that sometimes the only way to prove your worth was to face the test head-on, no matter how unfair or dangerous it might be. Moving to breach, she said calmly into her radio, her voice betraying none of the tension coiling in her muscles. Every instinct screamed at her to abort the mission, to call for backup, to do anything except walk deeper into what she now understood was a trap designed specifically for her. But Sarah Martinez hadn't come this far by backing down from challenges, and she wasn't about to start now. Whatever Stone, Webb, and Ricci had planned for her, she would face it with the same courage and determination that had carried her through every previous obstacle in her path to joining the SEALs. The door to the target building loomed before her, and beyond it waited a confrontation that would test everything she had learned about survival, courage, and the true meaning of military honor. As she reached for the handle, Sarah offered a silent prayer that Commander Harrison was monitoring the exercise more closely than usual, and that her training would be enough to see her through whatever came next. The metal door was cold under her gloved hand as she pushed it open, stepping across the threshold into an unknown that would either forge her into the operator she aspired to become, or destroy her dreams entirely. Behind her, 3 men followed with intentions that had nothing to do with the mission they were supposed to be executing, and everything to do with a twisted desire to prove that some barriers should never be broken. In that moment, Sarah understood that the real test wasn't the obstacle course or the tactical scenario. The real test was whether she would emerge from this crucible with her integrity intact, her mission accomplished, and her tormentors held accountable for their actions. The outcome would depend not just on her training and skills, but on forces beyond her control, including whether anyone was watching closely enough to see justice done when it mattered most. The interior of the target building was dimly lit, shadows stretching across concrete walls that bore the scars of countless training exercises. Sarah moved with practiced stealth through the narrow corridor, her weapon raised and ready, every sense alert for potential threats. The building's layout was familiar, she had studied the blueprints extensively, but familiarity bred a dangerous kind of complacency that she fought to resist. Behind her, the footsteps of Stone, Webb, and Ricci echoed with deliberate heaviness that violated every principle of tactical movement they had all been taught. The sound made Sarah's skin crawl with apprehension. Professional operators moved like ghosts, their footfalls silent and purposeful. The deliberate noise was a message, a psychological pressure designed to remind her that she was outnumbered and isolated. Approaching the main corridor, Sarah whispered into her radio, following protocol despite the growing certainty that this exercise had devolved into something far more sinister. Her training demanded that she maintain professional standards even when others abandoned theirs. "Copy," came Stone's response, but she could hear the smirk in his voice even through the static. "We're right behind you, Martinez." "Real close." The words carried implications that had nothing to do with tactical positioning and everything to do with intimidation. Sarah's jaw tightened as she processed the deliberate emphasis on close. Every instinct screamed at her to abandon the exercise and extract immediately, but she knew that backing down now would validate every argument against women in special operations. As she rounded the corner into the main corridor, Sarah's tactical awareness picked up details that confirmed her worst fears. The positions her team had taken weren't designed to provide mutual support or cover potential threat vectors. Instead, they had arranged themselves to control her movement and limit her options. Stone had positioned himself to block the main exit, while Webb controlled the stairwell access. Ricci had taken an overwatch position that gave him clear sightlines to anywhere she might try to take cover. It was a textbook containment pattern, the kind used to control hostile forces rather than support friendly troops. The realization hit her like ice water in her veins. They weren't just planning to embarrass or humiliate her. They intended something far more serious, something that would end her career and, possibly much worse. "Target room should be just ahead," Webb's voice carried an anticipation that made Sarah's stomach turn. "Hope you're ready for some close-quarters action, Martinez." The double meaning in his words was unmistakable. Sarah's mind raced through her tactical options while her body continued moving forward with the mechanical precision of her training. She could attempt to abort the exercise, but, without concrete evidence of hostile intent, any accusations would be dismissed as paranoia or an inability to handle pressure. The alternative was to spring their trap deliberately, with full knowledge of what she was walking into. It was dangerous beyond measure, but it might also provide the irrefutable evidence needed to end their careers and protect future women from similar treatment. The decision required her to gamble everything on her ability to survive whatever they had planned. As Sarah approached the target room, she noticed that the door was slightly ajar, a detail that didn't match the scenario briefing. According to the exercise parameters, the room should have been secured, requiring tactical entry procedures. The modification suggested that the men had prepared something special for her arrival. Her radio crackled again, this time with Webb's voice taking on a mocking tone that abandoned any pretense of military professionalism. "You know, Martinez, we've been thinking about this whole integration thing. Maybe it's time someone showed you what real military training looks like." Stone's laughter came through clearly over the comm system, a harsh sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. "Yeah, some lessons can only be taught hands-on. Hope you're a quick learner." The facade was crumbling rapidly now, their true intentions becoming obvious enough that even the most charitable interpretation couldn't excuse their behavior. Sarah realized with grim clarity that they had moved beyond psychological harassment into territory that would require immediate and decisive action. "Ricci, you got her exit routes covered?" Stone's question wasn't about tactical positioning, it was confirmation that they had planned this confrontation extensively. "All covered," came the reply, followed by a low chuckle that carried more menace than humor. "Nowhere to run this time." Sarah's training took over completely now, her mind shifting into the cold calculation mode that had carried her through the most challenging aspects of her preparation. She began cataloging assets and liabilities with mechanical precision. She was outnumbered 3-1, with limited escape routes and no immediate backup. Her equipment was standard training gear, non-lethal rounds and practice weapons that would do little real damage. However, she also possessed advantages that her tormentors had likely overlooked in their arrogance. Her hand-to-hand combat training was extensive and recent, while theirs might have grown rusty with overconfidence. More importantly, she was operating with the clarity that came from righteous anger and the knowledge that her cause was just, while they were driven by the confused emotions of insecurity and resentment. The target room door swung open at her touch, revealing an interior that had been modified significantly from the standard training layout. The furniture had been rearranged to create a confined space with limited movement options. Worse, she noticed that the emergency lighting had been disabled, leaving the room dimmer than safety protocols required. "Welcome to your final exam, Martinez," Stone's voice came from directly behind her now, close enough that she could feel his breath on her neck. The violation of personal space was deliberate and threatening, designed to trigger fear and submission. Sarah spun to face him, her weapon raised instinctively before she remembered that they were supposedly on the same team. The movement created distance between them, but she could see in his eyes that her defensive reaction had been anticipated and was somehow satisfying to him. "Is there a problem with the exercise parameters?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She was buying time, looking for options, and documenting their behavior for any future proceedings. "Oh, the exercise is about to get very real," Webb said as he entered the room behind Stone, his weapon pointed in Sarah's general direction with casual menace. "We figured it was time to teach you some practical lessons about military teamwork." Ricci completed their triangle formation, positioning himself to cut off her retreat path while maintaining what he probably thought was plausible deniability. His smile was the worst of all, friendly and reasonable on the surface, but with an underlying cruelty that suggested he was enjoying her predicament. "See, Martinez, the thing about special operations is that it requires absolute trust between team members," Stone continued, his voice taking on a lecturing tone that was somehow more threatening than outright hostility. "And we're just not sure we can trust someone who thinks the rules don't apply to them." "What rules would those be?" Sarah asked, playing for time while her mind worked through potential responses. She needed them to be more explicit about their intentions if there was any hope of making charges stick later. "The rule that says some jobs are meant for men," Webb replied bluntly, abandoning any remaining pretense. "The rule that says you don't belong here, and we're going to prove it." The admission was exactly what Sarah needed to hear, but it also meant that the situation was about to escalate beyond words and posturing. She could see the anticipation in their faces, the way their muscles had tensed in preparation for action. Whatever they had planned was about to begin. "I see," Sarah said calmly, her training kicking in to suppress the fear and anger that threatened to cloud her judgment. "And how exactly do you plan to prove that?" Stone's grin widened, revealing teeth that seemed predatory in the dim lighting. "We're going to show you what happens when the gloves come off, when it's not some sanitized training exercise with safety observers and injury protocols." 3-on-1, Ricci added helpfully, his casual tone making the threat somehow more chilling. "No rules, no referees, no one coming to help. Just you against us, winner takes all." "And what does the winner take?" Sarah asked, though she was increasingly certain she didn't want to know the answer. Webb's expression darkened with an intensity that made Sarah's blood run cold. "The winner gets to decide whether you walk out of here under your own power, or whether you get carried out and shipped home to mommy with a story about why little girls shouldn't play soldier." The threat was unmistakable now, and Sarah realized that her situation had moved far beyond career concerns into territory that threatened her physical safety and, possibly, her life. The three men had clearly planned this confrontation extensively, choosing a time and place where they believed they could act without consequences. What they hadn't counted on was Commander Harrison's instinct for trouble, developed through 20 years of managing elite operators with aggressive personalities and strong opinions. 2 floors above, in the observation room that overlooked the training facility, Harrison was watching the exercise feed with growing alarm. The audio pickup was clear enough to catch most of the conversation, and what Harrison was hearing violated every principle of military conduct he had spent his career defending. His weathered face grew darker with each exchange, his hands clenching into fists as he watched his subordinates abandon every value the military was supposed to represent. Harrison had suspected that some of his men might have issues with integration, but he had never imagined they would take matters into their own hands so blatantly. The conversation he was witnessing constituted conspiracy to commit assault at minimum, possibly much worse depending on their ultimate intentions. His hand moved to the radio control that would allow him to intervene immediately, but something made him pause. Martinez was an exceptional operator, and she deserved the chance to handle the situation herself if possible. More importantly, immediate intervention might not provide the kind of ironclad evidence needed to ensure that Stone, Webb, and Ricci faced appropriate consequences for their actions. Back in the target room, Sarah had reached the same conclusion about documentation and evidence. If she could survive whatever they were planning while recording their behavior, it would provide the kind of proof that could prevent this from happening to anyone else. "Well, gentlemen," she said with false calm, "I guess we'd better get started then. But, I should warn you, I've been training for this longer than you might think." Stone laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Training with instructors who were pulling their punches, going easy on you because you're a woman. This is going to be very different." "We'll see," Sarah replied quietly, her mind shifting into the focused state that her instructors had taught her to access in extreme situations. Everything seemed to slow down slightly, her senses becoming hyperacute, her body preparing for the fight of her life. Above them, Commander Harrison made his decision. He would monitor the situation closely, ready to intervene if Sarah's life was genuinely threatened, but he would give her the chance to prove herself against these three men who had so badly misunderstood what it meant to be a warrior. The confrontation that followed would determine not just Sarah's future, but the future of women in special operations and the careers of three men who had forgotten that true strength came from defending the weak, not exploiting them. The attack came without warning, brutal and coordinated in a way that revealed extensive planning. Stone moved first, lunging forward with the confidence of someone who believed his superior size and strength guaranteed victory. His hands reached for Sarah's shoulders, intending to slam her against the concrete wall behind her with enough force to stun and disorient. But Sarah had spent countless hours preparing for exactly this kind of close-quarters confrontation. Her father's early lessons in self-defense, combined with advanced military combat training, had taught her that technique could overcome raw physical power when properly applied. As Stone's hands closed on air where she had been standing a millisecond before, Sarah pivoted with fluid precision, using his momentum against him. Her elbow connected with Stone's solar plexus in a strike that doubled him over, gasping for breath. Before he could recover, Sarah's knee came up to meet his descending face, the impact producing a wet crack that echoed through the confined space. Blood spurted from Stone's nose as he stumbled backward, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to shocked disbelief. "You broke my nose, you crazy!" Stone's snarl was cut short as Webb launched his own attack from the side, moving with the calculated aggression of someone who had done this before. Webb was faster than Stone, his approach more measured and tactical. He had learned from watching Stone's failure, keeping his center of gravity low and his hands positioned to grapple rather than strike. His training showed in the way he moved, professional technique adapted for violent personal use. Sarah recognized the grappling approach and responded accordingly, dropping her weight and pivoting to avoid his initial grab. Her counter-strike was a rapid series of palm strikes to pressure points that her instructors had drilled into her muscle memory, solar plexus, throat, temple, each blow delivered with surgical precision rather than brute force. Webb grunted in pain but managed to get his arms around her waist, using his weight advantage to drive her toward the wall. Sarah could feel his breath hot against her neck, smell the anticipation and excitement that this violence clearly aroused in him. The realization made her stomach turn even as her training kicked in with automatic response. Instead of fighting the backward momentum, Sarah went with it, using Webb's own force to drive her elbow into his ribs with bone-crushing impact. The sharp crack of breaking ribs was followed immediately by Webb's agonized scream as his grip loosened involuntarily. Sarah spun within his weakened grasp and drove her fist upward into his chin, snapping his head back and sending him reeling. Ricci had been hanging back, watching his companion's attacks fail while looking for his own opening. Now he moved with the desperation of someone who realized that their carefully planned assault was falling apart. Unlike the others, Ricci went for a weapon, drawing his sidearm despite the training exercise protocols that should have prevented lethal force. "Enough games," Ricci snarled, his earlier friendly demeanor replaced by naked rage. "Time to end this permanent-like." The sight of the weapon changed everything. What had been a violent assault with potential for serious injury had escalated to a life-threatening situation. Sarah's training shifted into a different mode entirely, one focused purely on survival against lethal force. She dove sideways as Ricci's first shot rang out, the training round striking the wall where she had been standing with enough force to leave a crater in the concrete. Training rounds might not be lethal, but at close range they could still cause severe injury or death. Sarah's roll brought her behind an overturned table that provided minimal cover. Her mind raced through tactical options while Ricci's footsteps approached her position with predatory patience. Stone and Webb were down but not out, both struggling to recover from injuries that would have stopped most people entirely. "You can't hide forever, Martinez," Ricci called out, his voice carrying the false reasonableness that made him the most dangerous of the three. "Make this easy on yourself and maybe we'll keep it simple." 2 floors above, Commander Harrison was no longer content to observe. The introduction of weapons, even training weapons, had crossed every line that separated tough training from criminal assault. His hand slammed down on the emergency alert button that would bring security teams running, while his other hand grabbed his radio. "All units, code red in Training Building 7, Harrison's voice carried the authority of 20 years commanding elite operators. "Armed confrontation in progress, immediate response required." But, even as help rushed toward the training facility, Harrison knew it might not arrive in time. Sarah Martinez was on her own against 3 men who had clearly abandoned any pretense of military honor or basic human decency. Back in the target room, Sarah was making calculations that would determine whether she lived or died in the next few minutes. Ricci was moving to flank her position, while Stone and Webb were recovering enough to rejoin the fight. Her cover was minimal and temporary, her options limited by the confined space and overwhelming numbers. The sound of Ricci's footsteps told her he was almost in position to end her defensive advantage. In seconds, she would be exposed to fire from multiple angles with nowhere to run. The time for defensive tactics was over. Survival required going on the offensive. Sarah burst from cover in a direction Ricci hadn't anticipated, moving low and fast toward Webb, who was still struggling to breathe through his broken ribs. Her tackle caught him in the midsection, driving him backward into Stone just as Stone was regaining his feet. The collision sent both men tumbling in a tangle of arms and legs. Ricci's shot went wide, striking the ceiling and showering the room with concrete dust. Before he could adjust his aim, Sarah had rolled behind another piece of furniture, but this time she wasn't hiding. She was positioning herself for a final assault that would end the confrontation one way or another. The makeshift club in her hand was a piece of broken chair leg, weighted and balanced like the improvised weapon she had trained with in survival courses. As Ricci rounded the furniture to get a clear shot, Sarah was already moving, the club whistling through the air in an arc that caught him across the wrist holding his weapon. The gun clattered across the floor as Ricci screamed, his wrist clearly broken by the impact. Sarah didn't give him time to recover, following up with a strike to his knee that dropped him to the floor beside his weapon. Her final blow with the club connected with his temple, and Ricci collapsed unconscious beside his fallen pistol. Stone and Webb were struggling to untangle themselves, both still dangerous despite their injuries. Stone's face was a mask of blood from his broken nose, while Webb moved with the careful precision of someone trying to protect broken ribs. Both men's eyes held a rage that suggested they would rather kill Sarah than admit defeat.
"This isn't over," Stone gasped, wiping blood from his face as he climbed unsteadily to his feet. "You think you won something here? You just made enemies for life."
"No," said a voice from the doorway that cut through the room like a blade through silk. "What they just did was end their military careers permanently." Commander Harrison stood in the entrance to the target room, his presence filling the space with an authority that seemed to physically push the three injured men backward. His steel-gray eyes took in the scene with the analytical precision of someone who had seen combat in a dozen countries and never failed to identify the guilty parties. Behind Harrison, a full security team was stacking up in the corridor, armed and ready to take whatever action their commanding officer deemed necessary. The sound of running feet echoed through the building as additional reinforcements arrived to secure the scene. Stone, Webb, Ricci, Harrison's voice carried the kind of cold fury that veteran operators learned to fear more than enemy fire. "You three are under arrest for conspiracy, assault with a deadly weapon, and conduct unbecoming. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right." The three men looked like children caught in the act of something they knew was wrong but couldn't quite believe they would face consequences for. Stone opened his mouth to protest, but Harrison's raised hand cut him off with the finality of a blade. "Not one word," Harrison commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority.
"Security, take them into custody and get them medical attention. I want them isolated until the investigation is complete."
As the security team moved to secure the three men, Harrison turned his attention to Sarah, who was standing amid the wreckage of the confrontation with her makeshift weapon still in her hand. Her breathing was controlled but rapid, her eyes still alert for potential threats, her body coiled with the tension of someone not yet ready to stand down from combat readiness. "Martinez," Harrison said quietly, his voice gentling from command authority to something approaching paternal concern.
"Are you injured?"
Sarah took a moment to assess herself, checking for damage while her adrenaline slowly began to subside. Her knuckles were scraped, her uniform torn, and she would definitely have bruises tomorrow, but nothing seemed seriously damaged. "No significant injuries, sir," she reported, her voice steady despite what she had just endured.
"I'm ready to continue with duties." Harrison's expression shifted to something that might have been pride mixed with amazement. After what she had just survived, most people would be demanding medical attention and psychological counseling. Martinez was ready to get back to work.
"I think you've done enough work for one day, petty officer," Harrison said with the ghost of a smile. "But I want you to know that what I just witnessed was some of the finest combat performance I've seen in 20 years of special operations."
The praise meant more to Sarah than Harrison could possibly know.
Coming from a commander of his reputation and experience, it validated everything she had worked for and sacrificed to achieve. "Thank you, sir," she said simply, though the words carried weight that spoke to months of doubt and uncertainty finally being resolved. As the security team finished securing Stone, Webb, and Ricci, Harrison made a decision that would reverberate through the special operations community for years to come.
What had happened here today would not be covered up or minimized.
It would be prosecuted to the full extent of military law, and it would serve as an example to anyone else who might confuse military service with an opportunity to abuse power. The three men who had entered the training facility that morning with plans to end Sarah Martinez's military career were now facing the end of their own. Their actions had been witnessed, recorded, and documented beyond any possibility of denial or rationalization. But, more importantly, Sarah Martinez had proven beyond any doubt that she possessed the skills, courage, and determination required for special operations. The ordeal that was meant to break her had instead forged her into exactly the kind of operator the military needed, someone who could face overwhelming odds and emerge victorious through skill, courage, and unwavering commitment to doing what was right. The military justice system moved with swift and decisive action that surprised even veterans familiar with the usually glacial pace of official investigations. Commander Harrison's detailed report, combined with the recorded audio and video evidence from the training facility's surveillance systems, created an ironclad case that left no room for denial or legal maneuvering. Within 48 hours of the incident, Stone, Webb, and Ricci found themselves confined to the base brig while a team of military investigators pieced together evidence that would determine their fate. The speed of the investigation reflected both the serious nature of their crimes and the military's recognition that the entire special operations community was watching to see how this unprecedented situation would be handled. Sarah Martinez spent those same 48 hours in a whirlwind of medical examinations, interviews with investigators, and meetings with victim advocates who seemed surprised by her calm, professional demeanor. Most assault victims required extensive psychological support to process their trauma, but Sarah approached the legal proceedings with the same methodical precision she brought to military operations. "Tell me again about the moment you realized this wasn't a legitimate training exercise," asked Lieutenant Colonel Janet Pierce, the lead investigator assigned to the case. Pierce was a compact woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for thoroughness that had made her one of the military's top criminal investigators. Sarah reviewed the events with clinical detachment, describing the subtle signs that had warned her of danger, the improper positioning, the inappropriate communications, the modifications to the exercise parameters. Her ability to analyze and articulate the tactical failures that had revealed the conspiracy impressed Pierce and would later prove devastating to the defense. "At what point did you fear for your life?" Pierce asked, her pen poised over a legal pad covered with meticulous notes. "When Ricci drew his weapon," Sarah replied without